Hi guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another episode of RST How To. Today we're going to be focusing on tyre pressures and brake ducts. It's something I get asked all the time and it's the first thing you should do when you get into a car, so you've got a great solid base to work from for the rest of your setup. We're at Spa, we're in the McLaren 720S in GT3 and we're going to dive straight in to how we get started. Make sure you sub to the channel, hit that bell icon and we'll go from there. So the first thing you need to do is make sure that if you know your temperatures, pick them. You might as well. If you know what you're going to be racing in, then make sure you've got similar conditions. I've got a race coming up which is roughly 23, 24 degrees ambient temperature, and the track temperature is going to be a little bit higher. So I'm going to make sure that happens in my race, okay? And you can see we've got 23, 25, 26 at the top right there, which is absolutely fine and something we can work with. Just going to load a quick setup, and for the purposes of this, I'm going to open up the brake ducts all the way just so we can have a starting point. We've got some pressures on the car, but the best thing you can do is just go out, get started and get a baseline for your pressures so we can work with RST to then build a picture of how we're going to change them. So the first thing to notice is this is lap 4. We're at the beginning of the lap and, brakes are green, tyre pressure's a little bit low on the front, a little bit high on the rear, okay? We need to do 4 or 5 laps to build up a consistent picture in the data. As you can see by the end of the straight here, our brakes are super blue, okay? So this is the point we're hitting the brakes, and that means we're going to be losing some serious performance. And this is the first thing you need to look out for is, are my brakes green or a little bit green before I start braking? It's a similar story into this final chicane. You can see they get green by the end of the braking phase. Even the rears actually are still slightly sort of bluey turquoise, but really that's the first thing we need to concentrate on changing, and we're going to do that. Look at the data now. So you've got to this situation where you've run your laps. Ignore these down here because obviously I've run the whole thing as a sort of set really, but we're going to concentrate on the first one. The first thing we're actually going to look at are these brake temps, okay? Because over the course of these first few laps, if we just build up a bit of a picture, you need to run at least sort of 3, 4, 5 laps so you can get that consistent view. As you can see, the first couple of laps are a little bit lower. You need to get up to that sort of 5th lap before you really start getting any pertinent data, okay? And there's a couple of things we can pick out that confirm our suspicions that the brakes were too blue and we were losing a little bit of performance, okay? And the first thing is, look how we look at this rear brake here, the middle graph. Look how low the rear temperature was. It's less than 100 degrees. Really, we need them to be up, 250, 300, 350 degrees, really. So the fronts are okay, but again, going down that long straight up the Camel Straight, they're losing a lot of temperature. It's a similar story into the final chicane as well. So the first thing we know we need to do is to close up those brake ducts. We're going to make that number smaller. It was at 6 just for the purposes of illustrating this, and we're really going to close that down. I think we'll put it on sort of 3 or 4. The second thing that we're going to look at is really building up this picture of how the tyre temperature and pressure looks at the minute, okay? So what I've done is I've just put the first lap here, which will be the sort of greeny yellow lines, and then we've got the red and blue, which is our final sort of lap in that run. You can see there's a massive difference, and the temperatures are going up and pressures are going up, so we can ignore that first one. And there's a few things that we can sort of pick out from these as we just sort of make it a little bit more illustrative. The first thing is we go down the grass. So this is our front tyre temperatures. The maximum temperature you want is about 95 degrees, okay? So anything up to 91, 92, that's real safe, and that's absolutely fine, and that's what you should be aiming for. So here at 83 is a peak, down to 76.4 on the front right as a real low. As you can see, obviously around Spa, the right hand side of the car is really fluctuating between some really high load corners and some not loaded at all corners, which is why it fluctuates a lot. And you get this, and this is why we pick Spa, is because it's very difficult to get the tyre pressures right. And it's a similar story on the front right, okay? So we've got the front left and the front right. We've got this huge adjustments on the rear hand side of things. The rear temperatures, again, we've got a little bit more temperature, which is great. We've still got a bit of fluctuation, so temperature wise the rear's okay, but still room for improvement, right? If we drop down to the pressures graph, and this is really where we start to get a bit of interest, we already know that we're going to have to change those brake ducts because they're too cold. So what's going to happen when we close them up is the pressures are going to go up because we're generating more heat, the tyres are going to be more inflated. So we know we need to offset that a little bit and decrease some of these pressures, but we're starting to get an idea of the range of where these pressures are. So if we take the fronts here and this sort of third graph down, you can see the front right's got a low of 26.9 and actually a high of 27.5. And remember that range 27.3 to 27.7, that's really where we want to be. So it's, you know, it's fluctuating way too much because of those brake ducts. You see this huge loss down here in pressure as we go through and up Camel Straight, and again as the tyre isn't really loaded all the way into the triple left. It's really key to start thinking about a point in the track which is kind of your, okay, yeah, the pressure's here. If they're good, then the rest of the track is going to be great. You can see the front left is actually relatively stable. Its range is sort of 27.1 to 27.3. So we know we need to bolster that up a bit, but we know the range is, you know, that's not really going to be our problem side. It's going to be the right-hand side of the car. Similar story for the rears, right? Overall, they're a bit high. We start at 27.8. But the range is okay again, but you can see there's still a little bit of fluctuation, but we know we need to close down those brake ducts immediately. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's close up the brake ducts so we get some more heat in those brakes. We're not going to be losing temperature as much going down the straight and therefore pressure. We're also going to increase our braking performance. So let's see how that affects the next run. Just going to quickly do that then, and all the time we're thinking about trying to get our pressures in this range, which is 27.3 to 27.7. okay, the brake temperatures as well, we need to be above 250. Really, it's easier looking at the tire, the brake temps are in game where it's, you know, green, blue, turquoise. So we need them to be in green. Definitely when we're braking, slightly turquoise is okay at the start of some heavy braking zones. But you know, we really need to start thinking about getting our pressures in the right place, and start thinking about picking a point in the lap where we can really identify that, oh yeah, okay, our pressures are 27.5 here. That means we're going to be good looking at the data, and it's going to show us that we've got a nice range, and we can pick that place in the lap to really adjust our pressures from. It's all about getting a range right. It's not about having 27.5 for the whole lap because it's not possible. Just picking that point. So at the end of the second run then, what can we learn? You can see that our pressures and temperatures are pretty stable throughout the third and fourth lap. So let's get rid of one of them, so we're just concentrating on the really important data, okay? And let's go down the graphs again. You can see we've still got more temperature to play with in these front tyres up at the top. And again, the same with the rears, but they're up at sort of 91, 90-ish. I think the range is, yeah, sort of 91.5 and a low sort of 87 or so, which is absolutely fine. Still got a little bit more room to play with, but for the time being, that's absolutely fine. And if we quickly check that with the brake temperatures as well, then you can see we're even though they're losing a lot, down to 150 or so at the end of the long straights, that's much better than the 80 ish that we saw when we were first doing this. So let's skip back to ABS TP. Now the interesting thing here is we're going to start looking at pressures a little bit more detailed now, because our brake ducts are getting closer to where they should be. I think we'll probably close them up a little bit to make use of those temperatures and get a little bit less drag. When your brake ducts are open, they're going to cause a bit more drag. When they're closed, they're going to cause less drag and get more speed, all that sort of thing. Okay, so it's running them as close as you can without overheating the tires. Really, that's what we're aiming for. So the front pressures then, this third graph down here, we can immediately look that the range is sort of smaller than it was before. We were fluctuating between sort of 27.4 and 26.7 or something like that. I think now we're more like 27.1 to 26.5, so it's slightly smaller. But again, that right hand side tire, the blue line in this instance is our problem tire. Okay, you can see that it has a higher high and a lower low, so we need to really, that's the range that we need to get in the right place. So if we're thinking about closing that front brake duct up by 1 click, we need to compensate from that with a couple of clicks of pressure. You can see this one, we're 27.1 at the start of the lap, and by the time we get up camel straight and it becomes sort of a little bit frustrating, we're up down to 26.5. So we know we need to bump that tire up at least 0.5 of psi. We need to remember that range 27.3 to 27.7, and then that brake duct is going to compensate for that a little bit more. So maybe that low, if you add the half psi, will become 27.0, and then with the closed, 1 click more closed brake duct, it could increase to 27.2. So I reckon about half a psi just to see. At the same time, the high is 27.1, so that would make the high 27.7 or 27.8, which is really the range that we want to be in. Okay, if we look at the rears, then a similar story between the left and right hand side of the tires. The left hand side pretty stable. It's got a low of 27.2, is that almost 27.1, and a high of 27.4. You can see the exact numbers over here on the right hand side of the screen. That's okay. Okay, we know our brake ducts are roughly going to be the same, but I think we're going to close that rear again, because remember the temperatures we've got up here, we've got a little bit to play with, and that might just bring those up a little bit. But again, it's the right hand side of the car which is going to be frustrating. They start pretty similar, they end the lap pretty similar, but by the time we get into this middle section of the lap where that right hand side of the tire has been unloaded for a lot of the time, it's really lost a lot of pressure, and we're down to 26.9. So I think again closing that brake duct by will increase the pressure by a little bit, 0.1, 0.2, and then we need to up that pressure by 0.3 or 4, maybe even a little bit more. So let's go ahead and do that. I think the key points in this are we've got some temperature to play with, so we can change the brake ducts still, make them a little bit more close, and then we've got that range on the left hand side of the car is okay, but we just need to bring it up. The right hand side of the car is really where we need to get that perfection in the range, and we need to start thinking about a point in the lap. It's usually Eau Rouge around Spa, but identifying a point in the lap, so this is Eau Rouge here, where the tires are pretty okay, pretty similar, and that's going to be our point where we will sort of dictate where the tire pressures go. So if you look at the rears again, 27.1, if we bring that up by 0.4 of a psi, that's going to be our sort of average for the rest of the lap. So you need to think about where's important in the lap to have pressure, and where's a good indicator of where that pressure is. So again, just doing that quickly then, and this is probably the sort of second to last adjustment we're going to make. We've built up a good picture in the data of what we need to do to the pressures and the ducts. We're starting to get closer and closer. It's just about putting the time in now, running those 4 or 5, 3, 4, 5 laps just to get a really stable baseline in the data. We know we didn't take 5 laps, it's sort of 3 or 4, and then go from there, because it's really, really key that you don't skip this trying to do it too quickly. If you end up having 3 or 4 guesses, you might as well have just done it properly the first time, right? So all the time you're doing this, you can start to figure out what you're doing with the rest of your setup and start to think about it. But for the time being, concentrating on pressures. You can see going through Eau Rouge in the front to 27.2 and 3, just about in the range. Front left is a little bit low. The rears are in the range though, okay, 27.4. So we're going to play through the whole of this lap, because although the brakes are getting a little bit blue, they're still turquoise at the front and nowhere near that really dark sort of royal blue that we saw. The rears are just getting that way, but the fronts are absolutely fine. They're green sort of pretty much straight away when we press the brakes. And remember, we're in sort of mediocre temperatures, so if it gets cooler, we might be in a little bit of trouble. If it gets hotter, we're absolutely quids in, okay? And this is the phase in the track where that right hand tire is not loaded at all, okay? So it's all left-handers till we get to all right-handers, sorry, till we get to this left-hander here, and you can see it's really down on pressure. 26.9. It's struggling for grip. It's absolutely fine. The setup can deal with it, but we ran a little bit wide. This is the corner that you need it to be ready to be activated, and we're about 0.4, even 0.5 psi down on the perfect through there. And you can see from this point on the track down to the next sort of 20 seconds or so, that front right and to the rear right to some extent is just going to gain pressure. It's just gaining all the time through here. We're already 0.4 up. It's going to gain more through this left-hander. Well, 27.4 now. So it's about getting that range right between the start of the triple left and exiting this corner here, which is really, you don't need the right-hand tyre now because the left-hand side of the car is loaded, okay? So picking that range absolutely crucial on the right hand side of the car around Spa, and that's really the important takeaway from here, especially around Spa. But for any circuit, you need to get that range and get a point in the track where you know where that range is important. Okay, so but for us, it's between the triple left and the end of that section onto the sort of the back straight, I guess you could call it, into this final little section. So run 3, we're getting a little bit closer to where we need to be, still some work to be done. The first thing I wanted to run through is just check the brake temperatures again. So this is the first run that we did, well, the last lap on the first run. We closed the brake ducts down a little bit, and that increased that range. Oh, it was decreased the range, but it increased the sort of max and min temperatures really. And then again, we closed them a little bit more. We're starting to get more into that operating window. Even by the end of the straight, we're sort of 200 or so degrees, 150 on the back here. So we're starting to get to the range where we want to be. So run 3. Let's switch over to the temperatures and the pressures. By the way, a little tip on RST: if you've got a graph like this, which you don't really know what it looks to, if you double click, you can control and double click as well if you want both axes absolutely perfect. That's a quick way of doing that rather than fiddling around with your wheel and your mouse, that sort of thing. So just double click on both axes and it will give you the way forward from there. So what do we learn from this session? We learned that we're almost there. Okay, we just need to make a couple more adjustments, but we know exactly where we need to be now. So if we look at the temperatures again, we're absolutely fine. We're in the range. I'm not too bothered about these. We know the brakes, although they're still getting a little bit blue by the end of the straights, it's nowhere near that dark blue that we saw at the beginning of the video, which is really starting to hurt us because the brakes really weren't applying or gripping into the pads when we were pressing the brake. And there was that phase where we weren't really slowing down, and that's really quite an important phase. That initial braking is the hardest braking, and we weren't getting that. So now we are, which is great. We don't really need to worry about brake ducts too much now. Maybe we could change them a little bit if we wanted to, but for the purpose of this, we're not. We're all about getting the pressures really spot on now, okay? So if we take the front pressures, we've got the front left in red and the front right in blue. We know the left-hand side of the car is pretty stable. It has this sort of boost in pressure around here, the section at the end of the camel straight. That's absolutely cool. And once we get to this pressure, and in this instance it's 27.4, it's kind of stable. It drops by 1 psi, gains 1.1 of a psi, sorry, gains 0.1, but it's relatively stable. So we know that actually by this point, if we're in the range here, we're going to be in the range for the rest of the lap, okay? It's not the same case for the right hand side of the car. We see this huge loss in pressure from 27.4 all the way down to we go into 26.9 by the time we get to the end of that section where the front left has been working all that time. The front right has just been chilling out. It's just trying to maintain some heat. It's really not getting too much action, and now all of a sudden gets hit with a really long left-hander. So we're loading up the right-hand side of the car, and you can see this massive increase just in the space of sort of 2 or 3 corners, right the way down from 26.9 all the way up to 27.5. That's okay. We can work with a 0.6 of a psi range. We just need to pick this lowest part of the pressure is still within that range, because we want the tyre to work for that long left-hander, that triple left. We want it to be ready for action, okay? So my suggestion here is to bring that up. Remember, the bottom of the range is 27.3. So we want to bring this up by 0.4 of a psi, and that will give us, at this point in the lap, it will be 27.3. And at this highest point, it will be 27.8. That's okay. Yes, it's 0.1 of a psi outside of the range, but then you've got to think about what corners are actually upcoming, okay? So immediately you see that this is the peak here, and then it drops back down straight away as we're going through a right-hander. You can see on the little track map even down here, immediately the right-hand side is unloaded again. So we see this pressure loss. So while it's a little bit of a high here, if it does get too high, that's absolutely fine, because we're not going to be using it until the fast left-hander, which again, actually having a little bit more pressure is no bad thing. Let's flick to the rears then, and again you can see that there's a little bit more fluctuation between the left and right hand side, but on the left hand side in red, we start the lap 27.5. The lowest it gets here is 27.4, and the highest we get is 27.6. So we're pretty good. Okay, it's maybe just a touch low through some of these important areas here where it's loaded. The rear sort of left of the car going around these right hand corners could do, it's 27.4, could do with just 0.1 of a psi higher, just so you're in the middle of that range. So we're going to do that. But again, the right hand side is really where the action is around Spa, and that's where you need to concentrate your efforts in. It's not too bad. Highs of 27.6 sound like a weatherman, and lows of 27.3. So actually it's not a bad range, okay? But we know that around this long left-hander we need it to be ready for action, and we can get away with being a bit higher by the end of the lap because we're only getting up to 27.6, sorry. So let's pump up that right rear by 0.1 of a psi, and we should be absolutely glorious. Let's go take a look at the last lap, and then let's have a final pass at the data and go from there. So we'll replay through a lot of this lap again then, and really what you're looking for is looking at the pressures consistently, okay? So we know that it's a little bit higher at the start of the lap. We're actually 27.8 right now, which is beyond the upper limit, but just bear with me on this because Spa's quite a difficult one. Just look at the pressure through Eau Rouge. It's going to be 27.6 on the left, 27.7, 27.6 on the right front, and then the rears are 27.4 and 5. Okay, so it's pretty much spot on in our range. Yes, we started the lap a little bit high, but we lose so much pressure going up this straight, even with our brake ducts closed at 2 and 2. That there's really not too much you can do about it. We're just about hanging on to that turquoise braking at the front. The rear's a little bit blue, but we make the most of it, and it's absolutely fine. We can brake in a controlled manner there. And this is where that front right, this is the start of that phase where it's unloaded. So it's going to lose pressure through the next couple of corners. And what we really don't want it to do is go below 27.3. Okay, so we're 27.4 at the minute, 27.3 now. The rear's 27.4, and it's going to build a little bit of pressure through here if I take it properly, not really on the curb on the inside. But you can see now we're ready. Okay, the lowest it's going to get, both the rear and the front right, 27.3. So we're ready to be activated through here. And we know this is the start of our really key phase of the lap where we need those pressures to be exact, okay, so in that perfect range. And actually, by the time we get to this sort of elongated chicane, the fronts are on 27.5 apiece, a little bit of oversteer, and the rears are 27.4, 27.5, okay, so we know we're in that range. The front right's building pressure all the way through this, so is the rear right, but now we're in that unloaded phase where these two right-handers, we don't use the right-hand side of the car really because all of the weight transfer has gone onto the left, so they're immediately starting to lose pressure now. Actually gaining on the straight, having a little bit more pressure is no bad thing, especially around some of these faster corners because it'll give you that little bit more response that you're craving through here. A lot of people turn in too late for that, so it's no biggie. And it's absolutely fine. And coming into the final chicane, although we're a little bit high, it's still absolutely all right. So I think we've nailed it in terms of pressures and brakes. And let's look at the data for one final time. So after our final run, we've really gathered a lot of data through this experience. It's taken a little bit of time. You can see we've done quite a few laps. This is what we were faced with last time. We had a little bit of fluctuation, temperatures. The pressures were slightly down on the range, especially on the front. So if I just compare the new ones, our new and improved, finalized pressures, you can see that actually we didn't need to change the rears that much. But if you take the sort of yellow and green as our new pressures, then you can just see that they're slightly higher, especially the rear, the final half of the lap. It's just in that range a little bit more, and it's just ready to activate just a tiny little bit around here just before the fast left. So that's cool. If I then look at the front pressures, you can see that we're fully in that range a little bit. In fact, the front right, and we'll talk about this, the front right starts and finishes the lap a little bit high, but and the reason for that is because we want this, again, really key corner, the triple left. It's really fast. You need that front right to be ready for action. And before, where it was 26.9 down here, we've raised that by 0.4, and this yellow line is now 27.3. That's the lowest it gets through the lap. Okay, we have this big range up to 27.8. Yes, it's outside the range like we talked about. 27.7 is the high, but now we're going through a couple of right-handers where that front right is unloaded, so it's going to start losing pressure, and even by the end of the lap actually it gains a little bit back up to 27.8, but this key phase in the middle of the lap is where it's in its operating window, and those faster corners having a bit more pressure is no bad thing. Okay, so if we look at, we just dedicate the time to these ones, then, and you can see the front left is absolutely fine. Okay, so we start at 27.6, 27.5, we have a high of 27.7, and it sort of stays there. Maybe it could come down by 0.1. You know, we do go down to 27.4, but actually that's a pretty good range. Again, the rear, the low of the rear left, the red line is 27.4, and the high is 27.6. So we're really in that operating window. So over the course of this, we've built up this picture, and this is going to look like a crazy graph, right? But you know, all of these lines, we've made sense of what they mean over doing several runs, 20 or 16 laps, something like that. And that's really how to set your tire pressures, guys. Okay, so in conjunction with your brake ducts, pick a temperature which you roughly know your race is going to be, if you know it. The fun and games come where you've got an endurance where you have to go through night, rain, hot, cool temperatures, that sort of thing. But I'm going to go into that in another video because we've experienced that recently. But in this instance, where you know your temperatures, you can gauge it really well. You can close up your brake ducts as much as possible, and then you can start to adjust your tire pressures. And it's all about picking a point on the track. In this instance, for me, it's just before the triple left. I really should know the name of that corner. It's completely slipped my mind, where we need the right hand side to be ready to be activated properly around that corner, because there's nothing worse than understeering through there. And actually what you do is, if you are understeering, if the car's not ready, it will start to scrub, and you'll generate more heat and more pressure, and it will just be downhill from there. Your range is going to be more, and it's just a sliding slope, slippery slope down into tire wear and struggle city, really. So picking a point on the track which is good for an indicator of where your highs and lows are on the pressures, getting your temperatures up towards 90 but not really too much above them. You can go up to 95 if you need to, depending on the track. Spa is notoriously difficult to get this right, so I hope this was helpful, guys. I know it's a bit of a long video just for tire pressures, but I wanted to get it right for you and really show you the ins and outs of using RST for this. So in conclusion, I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you all on the next one. Bye.